Hello everyone and welcome to another fun week of the next issue. I'm your host, The Power Trip, and this week we continue on with Civil War. Now if you read the companion article to this video last week, actually I don't remember if I mentioned right off the bat if I was getting ready to watch the movie or not, but I have seen the movie now, which it is a spectacular movie, and any fan of comics and even people that don't read comics should definitely go watch this movie. It's very enjoyable. Anywho, one of the big things I'm going to start talking about with Civil War this week is the comparison between the comics and the movie. And by the way, I will not be giving away any real, I know that's an odd word to say here, real spoilers. Needless to say, if you cannot read it in the synopsis, and by synopsis, I don't mean the spoilers on Wikipedia. I mean the actual foundation of the story that you could see before the movie ever came out. Then I'm not going to give away anything big there. So don't worry about that. I want everyone to go and watch this movie and enjoy it from beginning to end without any spoilers. So a few of the things I did like in comparison was the introduction of the Registration Act, or in this one, the Sokovia Accords, as they were called. I did love the fact that in the comics, it was mostly just the government, quote-unquote, that was creating this law to basically give superheroes accountability. Superheroes and supervillains, anybody with powers, accountability. But in the movie, it was not a faceless figure, it was a reoccurring character. I say reoccurring because up until this point he wasn't reoccurring, but now, as of this movie, he is considered reoccurring, and that is General Thunderbolt Ross. The character that we haven't seen since the Incredible Hulk movie, which is canon to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. While, yes, Edward Norton was the one that played Banner in that movie itself is still canon to the MCU, mostly in regards to the main thing that was, about the only thing that was really keeping this thing canon into the MCU for the longest time, up until Civil War, was the additional scene at the end of Incredible Hulk, where Tony Stark comes up to Ross and tells him that they're getting a team together and he can help with his problem. With Civil War, you now have the additional confirmation there for anybody that was like, no, I didn't like that movie. The only reason I'm going to count that at all was just for that one scene, and that's the only thing that's important. Well, technically, yes, you could still, to a degree, say that. The fact that the character of General Ross has made this big return and is a huge face of the I won't say the antagonist, because it's not really an antagonist here. I'll get into that in a second here, but the main person that's kind of lording over the superpowered beings, as you will, with this law for the United Nations is, the fact that this character has made this big return really pushes that. And you have to go back and watch the Incredible Hulk now and get that big sense of why is he so adamant in this. We get the government's reason. You see that in the previews, in the trailers and stuff, and when he's mentioning and showing them all these things from previous movies that they have not been held accountable for, and that the governments of the world cannot tolerate that anymore. They're going to hold them accountable for this. When you see his attitude towards the Hulk in the Incredible Hulk movie, it's definitely the foundation to that, because he's got the army, he's trying to stop this beast. He does see Banner as a monster, but he also, he wants to hold Banner accountable for everything that he's done as the Hulk. And so out of all the characters they could have brought back for this role, Ross was definitely perfect for it. Now, that's the thing. That was the other thing I mentioned, was the fact that I can't really say antagonist there, because just like in the comics, you didn't really have a bad guy. In the comics, they tried to kind of make you not like Tony all that much, and he was kind of, quote unquote, the villain to Civil War, but not really. Because if you in much like any comic book tie-in and crossover and everything, you have to read a lot of the different tie-ins to get the full story. But on several occasions, when Civil War first started in the comics, Tony was against it. You see that in the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man that lead the road to Civil War. When Tony goes up in front of the Pentagon and says, hey, this is a bad idea, here's all the reasons why. And then he slowly starts to advocate for it. Well, it isn't until later on in a few other tie-in issues you see the reason he's doing is because he's seen the government's backup plans for what they're going to do if the act doesn't work, including sentinels everywhere, chipping all the metahumans and such. Basically, Days of Future Past to the extreme, which I say that, how could Days of Future Past be any more extreme? Basically, not as focused on mutants, more focused on anybody with powers. That's kind of what Tony was trying to prevent. And you do get that sense in the movie. They don't cover, obviously, a 2.5 hour long movie is not going to cover every single plot from the book. But you do get that sense with Tony. They do a really good job of basically capturing that version of that character from the book in the movie. It's really good. He's not the bad guy, but he is the one that's abiding by this law. But that's the catch here. You got the superheroes that are going by the law because that's what it's the right thing to do, quote unquote there. I'm going to say that a lot here, quote unquote here. But you've got a lot of heroes that are just trying to do the right thing. And they believe in the government. They believe in the law and the United Nations and the people that have put this law in place. And they hear these arguments. And they hear the people. That's the key here is you've got the people that are for it and the people that are against it. But they hear the people that are for it. And they know, hey, yeah, you're right. We need to be accountable for this. We've done all this stuff. And we've not been held in check. And look at all this damage we've done. And then on the opposite side, you have Captain America and his group that are doing, once again, just like in the comics, they're trying to protect your freedom of choice. Because basically it's turning into, in the comics, the same way it was with the movies, doing the same thing as it did with the comics of, if you are born with a power, or if you are in an accident that gives you this power, because a lot of Marvel's heroes didn't have a choice. They were bitten by a radioactive spider, or they were put in an extreme situation where they had to come up with some way to get out of it and somehow manage to gift themselves a power or build a suit or something. There was something there on that an outside force that gave them this ability. They didn't ask for it. They had this forced upon them. And so you have this law that's basically telling you, it's like, well, I'm sorry. I don't care if it was an accident. You have to register, and you are officially drafted into basically as a weapon of mass destruction for us. So tough call there. Sorry, but it's going to happen. And that's what Cap's side is fighting for in both the books and the movies, is your freedom of choice. Like, hey, this isn't right. You can't force these people to do what you want because they had this other thing forced upon them. You're basically force on force here. They're forced to have powers by an outside thing, being or incident, and now you're taking advantage of it and forcing them to have to do stuff to register and all, and have to show your secret identity and all this stuff. And there's a lot of good arguments for both sides and everything, and it's a really good story. It's, like I've said before, it's one of my favorite stories. I'm so happy to see it in movie form. And it was played very well there. Now, I'm gonna kind of flip this around a little bit as a little fun thing. I may actually continue Civil War on as a topic if you guys would really like me to, because I definitely have fun getting into this. But I'm gonna touch base on another little thing here, and I would love for you as the fans to let me know in the comments what you think. But how do you think a registration act such as the one that happens in Marvel would affect the DC universe? In Marvel, you've got a lot of heroes that now while you've got a lot of heroes that are alien and such and demigods and everything, you've got a ton of heroes in Marvel that get a lot of focus that are just your everyday citizen and they just happen to have extra gifts. You have your Captain America who's just got enhanced abilities, but he's still regular human. Tony, who's mostly got his Iron Man outfit in his brain, and that's about it. And then you have like Spider-Man. Well, I mean, Spider-Man already has a bunch of issues there with the Daily Bugle always writing negative or positive stories depending on the time period you're looking at. But the point is, a lot of the heroes of the Marvel Universe, the Punisher, even the X-Men, while some of them have great powers, some of them don't have such grand powers, the Fantastic Four and the likes, these heroes are your standard, for the most part, American-based heroes that would be affected straight up by the Registration Act from the comics, and, well, globally with the Accords. But it would definitely affect them, because if these heroes didn't register, all of a sudden you've got S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military knocking down Peter Parker's door, or the Baxter Building, or Xavier's mansion, and they will come for them, and they will come after them and force them to register and everything. But can you imagine that in the DC universe? I mean, Batman already has some of that to deal with. He'll be chased by the police sometimes he doesn't. But he's never been chased by the government and forced to register. What happens when they go after Wonder Woman? Then all of a sudden it's an act of war with Themyscira. They go after the Flash. Well, you're not going to catch him anyway. You're never going to know where he's at, and especially since Barry's a cop, then he's always going to be one step ahead. Green Lantern's part of a space corps, so much kind of like Thor and the rest. And Thor, he can go out into space or wherever else they need to go off planet. And how do you arrest Superman? Superman's own "I'm going to do what the world needs me to do" would basically be the only way you could enforce that act on him. He would basically, realistically, as the comics would put it, he'd just go into being Clark Kent all the time and maybe don the Superman guise or just save someone as a Blur really quick. But if the Registration Act were to become law in DC, I think it would be a much harder... They would have a much harder time enforcing something like that. I mean, you saw it in the comics when Thor did come back. It was Odin-powered Thor as well, and he bought land. If you haven't seen this, by the way, you need to pick up the series of Thor that was running right after Civil War ended, because it was amusing, it was very well written, it was great. But the new Asgard, as it was put, was actually hovering above the land that Thor bought, and Thor bought it fair and square, had the deed and everything. And so, but it was amusing because Tony went in to enforce the Registration Act, and Thor told him to get out. And if you really got to sit down and read. I'm skipping a lot of stuff here, but it was, for the most part, it was Tony going back and telling the president and them, we're going to leave him alone. He'll leave us alone. We're not messing with gods. You had something similar with the X-Men, where they wanted them to register, and the X-Men's already been fighting that battle of anti-registration with mutants for long before Civil War ever came about. So of course they were just, at that time though, they were in a very weakened state. They had already had to deal with the curse of no more mutants from Wanda Maximoff during House of M. and there was literally only 198 mutants left on the planet. So they were not in a very great position to fight any government, let alone their own government here in America. And it was they came to a compromise of, we will stay here on Xavier's grounds, and you leave us alone. We won't partake in it. We won't choose a side in the war. We won't help Captain America or you, but you just leave us alone. We won't do anything. And once again, Tony had to compromise there, and I think that goes to show a lot of what I was saying earlier of Tony in the comics. Once again, this was not really relayed on in the movie, though you could take it as something that could have happened off screen. But in the comics, Tony was not really a villain. You find out he's mostly trying to go pro registration. While he does believe in it to a degree, he doesn't believe the full extent of how it's working and what's going on with his friends, but he's trying to keep it to where there's not sentinels everywhere hunting down everyone and killing everybody. And so you see that with the fact that he does compromise. Whereas when the government created this Registration Act for all superhumans, they were not ready to compromise. They were fed up. And Tony brought in that edge of compromise that needed to be there. And so while a lot of the heroes were upset because they saw him as betraying them, he was trying his best to protect them while still enforcing the law and being a good guy. Once again, like I said, I don't think you would see anything near that level in DC. I don't think you could ever really touch upon that, especially because the villains. I mean, could you imagine a Registration Act of DC Universe where none of the Justice League can operate properly? Heck, Wonder Woman and Aquaman have their own areas of the planet where they're in charge, so they're their own governments, which they just go back to and not deal with it. And then all of a sudden Darkseid shows up, and while the Justice League would like to show up, what do you do when you're the Justice League and you're trying to help and you're trying to stop Darkseid and Apocalypse, and at the same time your own American government's trying to nuke you and arrest you and get rid of you while you're trying to protect them, you know? It's just not something I could see working as well in in an environment. Now, but that is a story to be told if DC ever wanted to give that a try. Now, given if they were to do it right now, or if they'd done it years ago when the original Civil War was going, you're just going to get a bunch of people saying, hey, you're copying Marvel, and technically, to a degree, they could be right. But it would still be an interesting thing to see, I think, if written properly. But Civil War at its time was magnificent. You'd never seen something like that happen before. So, but I'm going to end that off here for now, especially because I'm getting a little close to my time. But I think I will continue a little bit of stuff with Civil War, especially because I've got a few ideas of some really fun surprises I have in store for everybody. So I will see you next week for the next issue. Please feel free to comment and respond. Let me know what you guys think. What your takes on the Civil War, whether it was the movie, the comics, or just the idea, of the law in the Marvel Universe. If you would have been pro-registration or anti-registration. Once again, remember, don't think of it like if you were one of the heroes. Think of it as yourself. If you were, while yes, like I said last week in the article, it'd be cool to see Spider-Man swinging around or live in a world where the X-Men around, so maybe you got mutant powers. But then to realize all of a sudden that you can't keep it a secret to yourself, you're going to have to register with the government, which means you're automatically drafted, and they can come and force you to do whatever they want you to do using your power at any time, and you don't have a choice in that. But when that happens, you're also now a government employee with benefits and pay and everything like that, and you're still considered a hero, and the public gets to view you as such. So there's there's a lot of pros and cons to weigh. So what side would you guys be on? Would you be pro-registration or anti-registration? Let me know, and I'll see you all next week for the next issue.